All right, welcome back. Episode number 9. And I know it's been forever since the last episode, so I'm finally happy to be back. I've got another one for you, and it's going to be a little on the shorter side, but don't worry, I will make it up to you next time. So what's the delay? What have I been up to? Well, there's work, obviously having a full-time job, and 2 very energetic children keep me busy, but I also have a couple other things I do on the side. And believe it or not, one of those is actually voiceover. So I've had a few deadlines to meet, and the podcast has unfortunately had to wait a little bit. But I'm also doing a ton of flying, which has been really nice. And I'm mentoring a gentleman, and he's new to having airspace around him. So we're having a ton of fun just getting him back up to speed and flying out here in the West. On the 7th, I gave an FAA FAA safety team seminar. It was good for a wings credit. And it was about runway incursions. So we talked all about the different types and where they're likely to happen at the local airports. And of course, how you can avoid being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And then we had a Q&A time, which is always the most fun part. And it's a lot of fun. So thanks to Steve, you remember him from episode number 7, and also a guy named Rich Martindale. And you're probably going to be hearing from him in a future episode. And thanks to those guys for inviting me to give that talk. And the other flying I've been doing actually is helping out a friend, and he's got just a really minor medical thing going on. It's not really anything, but he doesn't have a medical for the time being, so I'm the guy with one. And so I got put back on his insurance to fly it's a Cessna Corvallis TT, right? Which is more or less a Columbia. But that's fine by me. Those are great airplanes, and it's been a while, so I forgot actually how much fun they are to fly, and I'm just having a blast. So also another quick shout out to my friend Chad, and he's from Texas, out in Addison. That's where he's based. And he came out here with the airplane and everything to get me put back on the insurance and put me through my paces. And it was great. So thanks for giving me that workout, Chad. And it's good to be back. But speaking of being back, we are back on the air with this podcast, and here we go. And the first bit of business I want to get to, of course, is thank yous. And the first is for Jeff Riolo. You're going to remember him from episode number 7. He became a patron of the show on Patreon. He found some value in the show, and he went over to patreon.com /podcastigonaplane and pledged to support the show, a couple bucks per episode. So Jeff, thank you so much for that. I really do appreciate it. And there are all kinds of ways that you can participate in the show. If you have questions from me or others that you've heard on the show, you can just ask. You could record some audio and send me the file. That's always fun. Or you could just send me an email and let me know what's on your mind. And speaking of what's on our minds, we've got quite a bit of feedback this time, actually. Some really good stuff and some questions. So let's get to it. Bill Heron, you remember him from episode number 5. He sent me an email and he commented, isn't it time to require transponders on drones, especially with altitude encoding? He says at least you'd be able to see them and advise your IFR and flight following traffic. He continues, the issue that I see would be that recreational drone operators would think that a transponder entitles them to operate within the traffic area. And that's pretty much it, Bill. You're exactly right. And, I agree with pretty much everything you said. Having transponders on everything would be great. I mean, shoot, I wish I could strap them to birds, right? But unfortunately, there are just a ton of operational issues that would really prevent that from ever actually happening. The first one, of course, is cost. But then above and beyond that, we also have the weight issue. I'm sure that we could develop a transponder that radar could pick up that just didn't weigh much of anything. But on a tiny little drone, I don't know if it would work. And then there's the issue also of screen clutter. If everything around me had transponders, I'd love to be able to see them. But the bummer is there would be so many little things on my radar scope, and it would just be difficult to see what's what and keep things apart. So also a weird one that a lot of people probably don't think of is that if I were to issue them squawk codes, or they were to have a discrete code, there wouldn't be enough codes to go around for that. There's only 4,096 of them out there, and we have a system actually to keep that in place because obviously there's more than that many flights airborne during the day in the U.S. at any given time, of course. But we'd have to come up with a new system or a new code bank or something that we could give drones, or even if there was just one code that they were all on that just showed that they were a drone, okay, cool. But it would still be pretty interesting trying to make that, really actually work out. But I think the biggest issue, though, is that we'd actually have to work them. And I couldn't even imagine trying to communicate with people that were not trained in aviation communications and actually having to try to deal with that. I would love to. But as this whole drone thing just unfolds, there are going to be growing pains. I mean, there already are, right? And it's not going to let up anytime soon. But actually, here's an idea. Jeff, Jeff Riolo, if you're out there listening to this, I know you are. If you want to record me a little feedback for Bill and we play it on the next episode, that would be amazing. Anyway, thanks, Bill. Thanks for being on the show a couple episodes back, and that was a really good comment. Another one, a gentleman named Ben Harned. I hope I pronounced your last name right there, Ben. But he sent me an email. He said hi, and he just wanted to say hello. He's been enjoying the podcast, and he learned about it from APG, and he's been listening to my podcast since episode number 1. He says he figured if he started right away, he wouldn't have to play catch up like he's trying to with all the other aviation podcasts. I hear you, Ben. I've been trying to catch up on about 5 different podcasts myself, both aviation and non-aviation, and even though I have a long drive to work, I'm still not there. It's quite a task. But he's a private pilot, and he got certified when he was young, and then kind of had some time outside of it. I won't get into it here. It's kind of a long email. But then after that, he had children, and I know how, believe me, I know how that gets in the way of flying sometimes too, unless it's already your job. And then he got back into it. So Ben, welcome back to flying, and hopefully you're digging it. He says he's flying a Piper Arrow and wants to start his instrument training. But most importantly for you guys, he says he works in, we'll just say he works in professional sports, and he's going to be out here in San Diego in November. So maybe we could get a little get-together going. That, of course, sounds great. And if anybody listening to this that's part of this or any other aviation community wants to do that, send me an email, drop me a line, and hopefully we'll get something together. And our next question comes from Sarah Toga. Okay. She says, hi, and I have a question about how ATC plans for a major airline accident. Are there drills and major plans for the sudden destruction of the runways at a large, busy airport? Specifically in the first minutes and hours, is there a lot of planes lined up to land every 3 minutes or so? Holding patterns for some, maybe diversions for others? Do the controllers practice often? How often are plans reviewed, practiced, and revised? Thanks, and still love your podcast. Ms. Sarah Toga. Okay, Sarah. Well, that's a huge question, and actually we could probably write an entire book on all of the things, or several volumes at least, on how each part of an airport operationally is going to respond to something like this. As far as how ATC does it, well, we have an awful lot of contingency plans, and those contingency plans are constantly updated. They're constantly being revised, and what they have a lot to do with is what other parties are going to do too, like emergency search and rescue, or the airport rescue, the local police, the local fire departments, local law enforcement, so on and so forth. And of course, the airport management, because the airport management really has a lot to say in how things are handled that occur at the airport, if you could imagine. So after something's occurred and the air traffic portion of it's done, our job is really to clean up the airspace and do what we need to do to get planes somewhere else. And then, of course, the search and rescue, or rescue and airport management, are going to take over. So the first couple airplanes, well, they're going to be sent around, and that's part of the reason we file alternate airports, because they're going to need to have a plan already in place for where they're going to go next. Some airplanes, that really isn't a big deal. If it's a Cessna or something, there's probably another airport really close by that can take a Cessna. But is in an airline situation like you asked about, yeah, there may not be an airport for some distance that can accommodate, a 777 full of people. The aircraft might be running a little bit low on fuel, and getting somewhere else that's suitable is a big deal. So all that is planned, of course, by the airlines, but it can be quite a surprise. Now, different airports and port authorities and counties and whoever's in charge of the airport, they do periodic drills and simulations. I think it's no less than once per year. And then every few years, they have to do a major disaster drill. I think it's every 4 or 5. And that's to the point where part of the airport may be closed down. They may truck in or already have an airplane carcass of some kind that people can actually crawl into. And at our airport, they actually put makeup on people. Some of us volunteer for it. Some of the controllers do. And they'll make you look like you just lived through an awful, awful crash. And then all the local law enforcement, local rescue, fire departments, things like that. And of course, the airport rescue and management, they're going to be in charge of the whole thing. And so what happens is they'll go out, and the drill may last for several hours, all the way from getting the call, all the way through rescuing all the survivors, all the way through triaging them and deciding what they do with them. And then also what they would do, unfortunately, with casualties. So these can get really, really involved. And again, each side of it has its own sort of trials. And again, each side of it is going to have a little different perspective. But from air traffic, our main goal, of course, is to just get all these planes to where they're going next. And that's going to involve sending them around, sending them back to departure, typing in a whole bunch of flight plans to alternate airports. And of course, the pilots are going to tell us where they want to go. So it can get pretty complicated, but it does run smoothly usually. Actually, if you want to hear kind of how it works, take a look back. I forget the date that it happened, but I know it's still up on Live ATC. But the incident where that Asiana 777 landed short of the runway in San Francisco, obviously nobody was expecting that to happen, and you can hear the controller snap into action and start sending airplanes around. And I'm not sure if anybody ever put up any audio from the radar side of that, the departure side of things, but on the tower part, you can definitely hear a lot about how it all goes, at least immediately. So great question, Sarah. Really appreciate that, and keep them coming. And news-wise, there's always a lot going on in aviation. So much, in fact, actually, that it's really hard to keep track. And that's sort of one of the reasons that this isn't really a news podcast. But every once in a while, though, I run across a story that I really think needs to be shared. And this one comes from my alma mater, Purdue University. And so, of course, I'm really biased. But it's my podcast, so biased news you shall receive. Haha. Anyway, seriously, I'm really glad that Purdue has a program like this. It's called Able Flight. And basically what it is they're doing a program that's developed and overseen by one of my former professors, actually, Bernie Woolley, and where people with disabilities are taught to fly. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to play for you the story that was done by Indiana Public Media, because they tell the story at least as well as I could. So here it is.
And now we go to Purdue University, the only place in the state where people with disabilities can learn how to fly. It's opportunity many of these students never thought possible. The students spend time in the classroom and using a virtual simulator before they're introduced to the open skies. Sophia Salaby has the story.
The runway at the Purdue University Airport is crowded. Students are inspecting planes and mechanics are working on maintenance. There's a constant stream of planes taking off and landing. Wesley Major is our pilot. He's been flying for 5 years now.
I have not flown a plane before my accident, and was the unique aspect of the Able Flight program, because I didn't have anything to kind of relate it to.
In 2008, Major was in a motorcycle accident and now has paraplegia. During recovery, his mentor, another graduate of Able Flight, introduced him to the program.
During the rehab process, I focused a lot on what I cannot do. I can't play hockey anymore. I can't go up steps. I can't run. Woe is me, so to speak. And then the Able Flight program kind of did the opposite. It opened the doors to what you're capable of actually doing.
All Able Flight pilots train on a small sport aircraft that is modified for each individual user. For Major, all he has to do is add an additional handle to his controls.
So this is the T handle, and this is what I use to control the rudder, which was normally controlled by a person's feet. T handle goes in super quick, comes out super quick.
The T-handle allows Major to do things with his hands that a pilot without disabilities would do with his feet.
Some of it's very simple. We don't redesign anything, but it does get other people thinking, and we've had a couple of engineers start looking at how to do hand controls for a variety of different airplanes.
Purdue Aviation professor Bernie Woolley oversees the program and says Able Flight participants are treated just like any other person. They have the same requirements any pilot would need to get certified.
It's a very intensive program. They are going through basically the same thing as a private pilot would here. And most private pilots take about 4 to 6 months, and they've got to do it within 6 weeks.
Over the years, the program has hosted people with paraplegia and quadriplegia, people who are deaf, and even someone with diabetes. Ray Martinio always wanted to fly, but he could never get a certified flight instructor or CFI to take him on as a student. Tinio is deaf, and he finally got his chance to fly when he received a scholarship from Able Flight 2 years ago. He uses several methods to communicate with the air traffic control tower. Woolley says the first time his students fly by themselves is one of the most important parts of the summer. He remembers Tinio's first solo flight.
And everybody's sitting there kind of, and it worked out great.
As a Purdue student, Tinio researches how to make flying more accessible for deaf pilots like himself. Since the program, he's gone on to earn his private pilot certificate and hopes to one day be a professional pilot. Tinio and Major are just two of the more than 50 people with disabilities that have graduated from Able Flight at Purdue. The program will welcome its 8th class of students next summer. For Indiana News Desk, I'm Sophia Salaby.
More than 50 people with disabilities have graduated from the program in the 7 years since it was introduced at the university. Woolley is set to retire within the next 2 years, but the program will continue. The university selected Major, who had never considered being able to fly, as the next director of the Able Flight program. Able Flight will welcome its next class of students next summer.
Man, what a great program, huh? Well, I'm already proud enough to have graduated from there, but this really takes it to a new level. And Bernie, if you're out there listening, I wish you all the best in retirement. I can't believe it's been almost a decade and a half since you were one of my teachers, but your classes were always really good times. So boil her up. Now, lastly here, I want to talk to you guys about flying as art. And, as a pilot, you're an artist, or that is to say you should be. How so? Well, it turns out that flying actually is a physical art. Yeah, I know. I can already hear you guys groaning like, here comes some philosophical aviation analogy, but hear me out. Now, I really believe that flying is an art form. Yeah, it's a really technical one, but it's more than just technique in everything that you do. And I think there's actually so much technique in it that it really does qualify as an artistic endeavor, in addition to just being a technical one. And just as the flying of an aircraft is an art form, well, so too does the career path of an aspiring professional pilot actually follow the path of some types of artists. I recently had my eyes open, not to the idea that flying is artistic. I don't think any of you are going to be surprised by that, but the parallels to the performing arts and how kind of remarkable they are. I had always thought of aviating as about the furthest thing from acting, but now I'm not actually so sure. The similarities were kind of brought to my attention by some really prominent actors actually in the voice acting community. And that's a community that I'm sort of a fringe member of at best. But listening to these seasoned lifelong pros talk, I was really actually amazed at how similar our worlds might be. Now, obviously, flying isn't a fine art like painting or photography, but it really is kind of like acting. And flying, like most art, is something that can be shared with anybody. And it's something that they experience fully, either by watching it from the ground or maybe by experiencing it in a plane. And it's not just pure expression, but like we said earlier, it's more than just mechanical task work. And I never really thought of myself as an artist. I dated one once, and it was fun for a minute, and then it did not end well. I think that the most clear-cut form of artistic expression with an airplane is probably aerobatics. It's the purest form of making an airplane do things that are really just neat to watch. But when it comes to juggling the most balls and, let's just say, turning coal into diamonds, I think the competent CFI might actually be one of the greatest artists out there. And having lived through doing it for a long time when hiring wasn't so good in the industry, I can say that the gig really fits the starving artist mold perfectly. So, all right, flying's artistic. Great. Well, why am I spending all this time talking about it? Think back to the last episode. Remember the piece I read by Ron Rapp about knowing thyself? I truly believe that a great amount of strife and discontentment in the industry can actually be traced back to the style of aviating that you do, or rather that you don't do. And if you'd like to enjoy your career and make a whole bunch of money, the best way would probably be to find the style of art that jives with you and, go after that. Like in acting, where when you find gigs that are in your wheelhouse, so to speak, you start booking work and then your career takes off. All right, sorry, that was a bad joke. But once an actor or any other type of artist, like a pilot, finds the kind of work that they jive with, they become facile, right? That means you can really just do the work with ease, and then you can begin to book work. Over time, though, and with the appropriate effort, they begin to master their craft, and then they become able to land better and better gigs. CFIs, I'm looking straight at you. Are you beginning to see how this applies to aviation? It's all about finding where you fit in. So, as I alluded to a second ago, once you're working in aviation, sometimes discontentment sets in, and it's hard to put your finger on why. And it seems to me, probably because I've been there, that some kinds of flying just aren't really in line with how you express yourself through flying. And what if I didn't get into flying to express myself? I hear you say. Well, that's a good point. Why did you get into aviation? Seriously. This happens in the art community too. Did you get into this line of work to express or to impress? In acting or musical endeavors, a degree of fame usually accompanies your success. That's kind of how it works. But some people thrive on it, and these are the ones that are out to impress people, right? Pilots, well, remember all those scenes in Catch Me If You Can, With Leonardo DiCaprio, when he had his Pan Am uniform on, walking down the street, he was treated like a celebrity. Everyone was definitely impressed. Now, obviously, things aren't like this anymore, so if that kind of thing had anything to do with why you got into flying, it's probably been a longer and harder road than you expected. But conversely, if you got into aviation to express, then you may not find it easy to exist in one of the more traditional epaulette-wearing jobs either. And as a matter of fact, it might seem as if any such expression has really been specifically engineered out. You're just there to take the passengers from point A to point B. Safely, of course. But that's it. Or is it? When I say express, I'm not talking about going rogue and taking artistic license with the operation of an aircraft full of paying passengers. Not at all. I'm just saying that no matter what kind of flying you do, there's room to do it really well. And don't let it kill your inner artist, because that's when burnout and discontent start to creep in. And if the style of flying you're doing is leaving you empty, well, maybe it's time to do something else. Anyway, this impress versus express concept was brought to my attention, like I said, by a couple of well-known voice actors and coaches I know, named Richard Horvitz and Crispin Freeman. So a huge shout out to those guys for the enlightenment that they've brought to me over the years. And when I heard Richard on Crispin's Voice Acting Mastery podcast, I had a huge light bulb on glass crashing moment, and I haven't been the same since. Acting usually has nothing to do with flying, but as you can see, the similarities here are just really uncanny. So what do you guys think? Send me some feedback. How is flying art to you? Do you have any artistic techniques you'd like to share? Have you found your aviation style and maybe it landed you in your dream job? Let me know. You can get in touch via the newly improved website, which of course is podcastingonaplane.com. And there you'll find links to all the social media like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and Patreon. And of course, you can send me an email too. If you have suggestions for show topics or anyone you'd like me to interview or social media you'd like me to share, say something. If you want to hear yourself on the podcast, send me an audio file, and I'll do my best to get you on the air. If you find value in the podcast and you'd like to support the show, check out patreon.com/podcastingonaplane, and you can see the future goals for the show and find out how you can become a valued supporter. And if money's tight, maybe just head over to iTunes and leave a positive review. It's free, and it'll go a long way to help others find the podcast. Well, that's all for now. Thanks again for listening. Your frequency change is approved until next time, and report back on this frequency for the next episode. Good day. The Podcasting on a Plane podcast is presented for entertainment purposes only. My comments and those of my guests, the website's content, and any of the social media, etc. are not part of my official responsibility as a controller or an FAA employee. The views and opinions you hear on the podcast are mine and those of my guests, and not necessarily that of the FAA. There is no nexus between Podcasting on a Plane and the FAA. Also, while I am a CFI, I'm not your CFI. Nor am I your mechanic, your doctor, your shrink, or your spouse. This podcast is presented for entertainment, camaraderie, and fun, but is in no way, shape, or form professional advice. It's not legal counsel, and it's definitely not flight instruction. If you are in need of professional advice, get some from somewhere more appropriate than a podcast, no matter how good this one may be.